Hi, this is Jeneen Miller, and you are watching Pieces of Victory. Today we have on our show Mackenzie Millar. She is a survivor of a lockdown residential program that took place in the state of Florida. Victory Christian Academy opens its doors in 1985 and closed down. It was shut down due to being unlicensed and not meeting up to fire code standards in 1991. There were numerous reports on child abuse, numerous, and yet this pastor only got a slap on the wrist. He opened up another compound in Mexico, calling it Genesis by the Sea. Authorities shut it down due to finding a holding cell for children. Mexico shut it down, and yet America kept it open for another 24 years in the state of Florida. It was called Victory Christian Academy, and then he eventually rebranded it to the Lighthouse. Again, we have on our show Mackenzie Millar. She's an activist amongst the survival community. She is participating in survivors of institutional abuse, and she is here today to tell her story of what happened behind closed doors. Please welcome to the show, Mackenzie Millar. Hi, Mackenzie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Welcome to the show, Pieces of Victory. It's such an honor to have you on the show today. And you are a survivor of Victory Christian Academy, which started in 1985, and there are articles about this program in the Los Angeles Times and also in the Tampa Bay Times. You can pull up any articles on the subject matter if you go to jeneenmiller.com, or you can visit Mackenzie Millar and see her TikTok to pull your stories. Wonderful. You were locked up in Victory Christian Academy, which was the same place that I was locked in, except I was locked in to Ramona, California. It started in 85. It closed down in 1991 because it was an unlicensed facility and it wasn't meeting up to fire code standards. Yet the pastor that was running the reform school didn't even get a slap on the wrist. There were numerous reports on child abuse. The social service worker that was working with me did a 50-page deposition, went to court for me, and he said that my stories matched other girls from 1985. And keep in mind, there wasn't the internet, so I couldn't get in touch with this person. Our stories matched exactly. And yet, there was nothing on child abuse. And he was able to take his school, close it down, and move it to Florida. And he abused more girls for 24 years.
Correct.
After numerous allegations, including rape. So
Yes.
let's talk from the beginning about your childhood before you got locked up into this place. What was your childhood like?
I was raised in a Christian home, but it was Methodist, so I was used to going to church, used to that routine. My parents have been married for years, so I didn't have my parents divorce or anything like that. So it was a very structured house. My sister had struggled with some drug issues by the time that I was 9. And so my sister was put into a program called SAFE. And pretty much it was like a drug treatment program with the 12 steps. But part of it was we had girls come into our house that we had to watch. And my parents would watch them, and they would stay overnight. And so that kind of affected my childhood.
Can you tell me a little bit about the congregation? Let's go back to your congregation, the Methodist Church.
Right.
Was it a kind God, treating others with respect and loving your neighbor? Were you afraid of God at that point? Were you a strong Christian in your community? Tell me what your faith was like back then.
Very strong Christian. From the time I was little, I accepted Jesus into my life. So it wasn't something that was pushed on me. It was something that I was able to accept on my own and make my own free choice to do so. And I wasn't pushed into it. So the church was very loving. I knew, Christ was giving, and so I gave a lot back to the church. And I was part of the youth group program, and nothing in that church was hateful, and so I enjoyed being a part of it.
So you knew what it was like to be a Christian before you were sent to this evil boot camp, taking on the flag of Christianity. It's wonderful that you had a great experience, because if you hadn't had that experience, you would have thought God was a monster and that you were an abomination in the eyes of the Lord. And that's what makes it so traumatizing for somebody who doesn't know what a kind God is like, and then they're exposed to this and they feel that that's all there is.
And it was very traumatizing seeing their version of God play out. That hurt me, because I wanted to speak up and say, he's not like this.
Right, exactly.
I couldn't. And so I wanted to make it clear that I'm not against Christians or Christianity at all, ones that, are able to help others with love, because that's what it's about. But this was not Christian.
Right. When you start abusing people, when you start abusing children, because that's what's going on in these teen programs, there's a problem. It's a problem. Freedom of religion, sure, I'm all for it, but you're not free to abuse our children. So you're a strong Christian at this point. What convinced your parents to send you to Victory Christian Academy? Can you get into that a little bit?
Me and my mom had some arguments, and sometimes the arguments got physical. And a lot of the arguments stemmed from me going to school, because I struggled with such bad anxiety. I would get to the point where I would take a bus to school, but I'd get to the bus stop and I wouldn't be able to get on the bus.
Were you bullied?
Yeah. And I don't just mean bullied, any type of bullying is wrong, but I don't just mean bullied like called names. Like I almost had my arm broken when I was followed home by 2 students from school.
That's awful. And so you confided in your parents about this?
Yes. And they tried to switch schools for me, so they tried to have me go to different schools, but it was a hard change, and so I was kind of school flopping. I was going from this school to that school to this school to that school, and in between all of that, I was missing a lot of work. And my niece had passed away, and my grandmother passed away, and she passed away slowly. She was in the hospital for weeks, and so I was very close to her, and I was going to have to repeat grades, and I didn't want to repeat the grade. And so a lot of the issues came from me not wanting to go to school. I was truant. I mean, I did sit in a truancy office. I was picked up by officers just because I was truant, but it wasn't because I was a runaway. And I don't mean anything against runaways or people who struggle with drug abuse or, teenagers that were sexually active. That was not my case.
But you weren't even doing drugs or anything like that. You were trying to escape being bullied, and then you were depressed about family members passing away, and instead of tackling those issues, you were treated as if you were just a truant.
And I think a lot of my anxiety I didn't recognize back then. I didn't realize it was anxiety, and so I would get frustrated and take it out on my mom and be like, why don't you understand me? Why can't you understand that this is what I'm going through? And, she tried, but it was really hard for her to understand, why can't you just get on the bus like a normal kid? Like every other kid can get on a bus and go to school. But, I did tell her about some of the bullying, but a lot of stuff I didn't, because it was just too difficult to talk about.
I mean, you did tell her about the bullying, and that should have been enough. How about homeschooling? She never thought about
I did homeschool. I did a program called, and she did try to get me on a homeschooling program, but this was, I think it was called Hospital Homebound, if I remember correctly. And it was a program that wasn't set up to be permanent, and they would call me. So they would call in and I would have to sit on the phone and do schoolwork. And it was just, I also struggled with it because I had like ADHD and focusing was an issue. So to get me to sit down and focus, and we've come a long way in mental health and, since back then. So
exactly. I agree wholeheartedly. So here you are, you're trying to do the homeschooling, you can't do that, and so your mother started looking into a reform school for you? The way that she was told, so I went to a Christian counselor, and the counselor was very nice to me, and I was working through a lot of my issues, and I was able to tell her a lot of things. And she ended up telling my mom, and I didn't know about it, but she told her about Victory and said, this is a good school, but that Christian counselor thought that this was a good program. Sure.
And so she was like, she'll be there with other people that can support her and help her do her schoolwork.
Oh, no.
I think this was mainly about getting me off the medication because I was on depression medication. I was on anxiety medication at the time. So they wanted to wean me off of the medication under a doctor's care and, get me to the point where I could do schoolwork. And one of the big draws was the ACE program because that was kind of like work at your own pace. And so here I would be in a facility where there were teachers that could help me. They could help me get off the medication. And, you can never tell what's going to happen when somebody comes off of medication. Withdrawals can be severe. And because I was taking a lot of anger out on my mom, we were fighting a lot. I don't know if that could have been done at home because I don't know what type of reaction I would have had when I came off of it. Right. Because when I got off of it in Victory, I was really sick.
And you're supposed to cut back on the dosage little by little until you're weaned off of it. Otherwise, you can get sick. You can die from that.
Right.
It's an issue. You can't just quit medication cold turkey without a repercussion. So here you are. The counselor suggests Victory Christian Academy. She has no clue as to what this program is really like.
Right.
And your mom jumps at the bit. So
she looked up pictures. I don't know. She looked up pictures, but I think she looked up pictures of it online, and she thought that it looked nice, and so that was a big draw because this property was well manicured. It looked nice, and I don't think that she saw any other articles, and I don't know how much digging she did, but I don't know if she saw any other articles about Victory in California.
Yeah, not enough digging, because if she were to dig, she would have found Victory in Ramona, California.
Yeah. And I think they tried to distance themselves from that. Like, that wasn't the same, or wasn't the same in California. Like, it was just the schools we were made to believe that they were different.
Right.
They were the same thing.
Sure. It's a fresh start. They're in Florida.
Yeah.
But just because you're in another state with the same reform school doesn't mean that they're not using the same scare tactics, and we'll get into that. So can you tell me how you were transported exactly to Victory Christian Academy? Because this is very traumatic. And they do have these places here in America that you can pay services to get your kids to a reform school, conversion therapy, wilderness camp for kids, rehabilitation programs. Can you tell me a little bit about how you were transported?
This was one of my worst memories that I have to date. And, I'm in my 30s now, so this is still hard to talk about. But yeah, I was sleeping in my bed, and I was at my parents' house. I was at home, and a light switch went on, and I noticed the light switch went on, and I woke up, and I had a very big gentleman standing over me. And I say gentleman, he wasn't very kind, but, it was a male and another female. And it was just like, get up, get out of bed.
What time was this at? Do you know?
I remember it being 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Correct. So to be woken up out of sleep at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I basically was dragged out of bed.
Dragged out of bed. And so were you screaming for your mother? What happened?
I was telling her, stop, like I didn't want to go, like please help me, and they're just like, just go with them.
Oh no.
Like,
I'm so sorry.
And so I was, my bedroom was in the back room, and there was a long hallway, and I wasn't fighting them, but I was struggling, trying to get away because I didn't want to go with them. I didn't know who these people were, and I think that that's part of the trauma is, they could have been anybody. They could have been a burglar. They could have been a kidnapper. I didn't know who they were.
That's very traumatizing.
Yeah.
So then what happened? You went along with it, or you were fighting the whole way?
They got me into a car, and they blocked me in. I remember there were no, you couldn't unlock the car from, the inside. So once you were in the back seat, it was kind of like a police car. It wasn't a cop car. They had taken the locks off, so you couldn't open it from the back seat. And one of them sat in the front. There was a driver, and then another woman who didn't come inside the house with me. She was in there in the back with me too, to make sure I didn't jump out a window or something, to roll down a window. But they took me to the airport, and they had me switch seats on the plane because they thought that I was going to jump out the exit. Now, I never said I was going to jump out the exit on a plane on the runway, but they had already thought that that's what I was going to do. So they made me switch seats in front of a flight attendant, and the flight attendant was like, what are you talking about? She's not going to jump out a plane. We're on a runway. I just remember, they thought that that's what I was going to do. And so
at this point, did you even know where you were going?
No, I had no idea.
Did you think about saying to the flight attendant, these people are crazy, can you help me?
My parents, I knew that they were sending me there, but I didn't know they were sending me there. But at that point, I knew that I was going someplace. My parents were sending me someplace. I didn't know where. In fact, I remember innocently asking my parents, was it like Hogwarts? Because I was a big Harry Potter fan. And so I thought I was going to go to Hogwarts. It would be a school like Hogwarts. And they told me yes. And so I naively went because I thought it was going to be fun.
Oh, no. And of course, they didn't think it was going to be abusive.
No. They just thought
it was going to give you structure.
Right. Yeah. They thought it was going to give me structure and get me off the medication.
Oh, my God. So then what happened? You get to the school. What happens inside the school?
Happens inside the school. He will, they took me inside. So the school, we don't have the gates, the electric fence, like California. You guys had the electric fence.
The 12-foot fence with barbed wire.
But when you drove into Victory, it was a very long driveway. And it was kind of a circle driveway. So, but it went way back. And then the school was set at the back. So, you couldn't run off the property.
Say it was on acres of land?
Yeah, it was huge.
Okay. So if you tried to run, was there surveillance cameras all around?
Well,
paint a picture for the audience.
Yeah, the door, if you were inside, you couldn't get out unless you tried to, break out. But everything was on sensors. Everything was on alarms. If you tried to run out in the yard, and I saw girls try to run out in the yard before, they were promptly tackled, not only by staff, but they had golf carts that they would drive around the property too. So if you were running and taking off and they couldn't get in their car to chase you down, they'd grab a golf cart really quick.
Oh my God.
They could catch up with the girls. So
here you are inside. They drive acres and drive in on acres of land, and you meet for the first time.
right. And he really didn't say much to me except, the speech about, you're going to be here for a while, like, get used to it. They're going to take you back there. And he wasn't nice about it. He was very rude, and I got brought back to the showers, and I remember I had to, like, strip naked in front of my peers and staff members. And so that was traumatizing, because who wants to do that in front of people, And it was at that point I didn't know how long I was going to be there.
Did they delouse you too?
They put, like, the lice stuff in my hair.
Yeah, the medicated shampoo for lice.
Yeah, and they also, like, inspected, like, my body. Like, they made me hold out my arms and, like, turn around a couple times to make sure I didn't have any piercings.
Okay, so they're checking for piercings, but did they even check your hair to see if you had lice?
No, they just gave us a shampoo. Yeah. And so after that, I basically, I want to say I went, and followed. I was put on the buddy system, so I was yellow shirt.
Buddy system to everybody?
Yeah, the buddy system is basically you are yellow shirted. I think is it for your first month or 3 months? I can't remember exactly.
The first month on buddy, and in Ramona, California, it was 3 feet behind a student, and you had to follow them around. We didn't have the color coordinated shirts to designate hierarchy, but why don't you go ahead and tell us what buddy was like in Florida?
Yeah, buddy was essentially the same thing. You had to be within at least, like, an arm's reach of the buddy. So if you were buddying somebody, you had to be able to at least, we couldn't touch in there. We weren't allowed to touch each other. But if a buddy got away, helpers and the people who were in charge of the buddy were allowed to grab them. So yellow shirts were buddies, and you were not guaranteed to get off of buddy after that month. You could be on buddy for a year. It all depended on if you proclaimed that you got saved, if you started acting right in the program, if you did certain things. There was no guarantee that you were going to get off of that buddy. And buddy is almost traumatic in itself, because not a lot of people think of it that way, but you're having somebody follow you into the bathroom. Now, they didn't go in the same stall with me, but they were in the stall next to me. So,
and plus you're behind them too. Right. I was behind my buddy, so it's very degrading.
Yeah.
To be behind another student, following them around.
And they would order you
around. Out of line, we were threatened to be put on dog leashes. In fact, I saw another student with a leash on, tied from her buddy to her. And so, did that ever happen in Florida? Or threats?
They threatened to do that, but for the most part, the person who was buddying was able to keep that person within that amount of reach. A lot of times, if they thought that they weren't doing a good enough job, they would switch the girls out to somebody else, so to another helper. And a lot of times the girls who struggled the most at Victory got put with the meanest helpers.
Can you explain about the Get Right room? Were you sent to the Get Right room at the very beginning of your stay?
I was sent to the Get Right room after I started throwing up off my medication. Not in the very beginning. I was threatened with it, but I never went in right away.
Okay, do you want to talk about the medication?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. This is a difficult subject for you to talk about.
No, you're fine. I was on 12 different medications for anxiety and depression. And I went into the schoolroom, and they brought me into the schoolroom, and they were on the ACE PACEs, and they had me do a diagnostic test. And I remember putting in whatever answer I thought, because I just didn't want to do it. They didn't give you time to process what was going on with you, and so I just did whatever. And then it came time to leave the schoolroom, because we had like, I say it was like a 10-minute break in between, and then we would go back to school. But towards the end of that school day, I didn't get up. And it was only like a couple hours of school. So this is not like a full day of learning. This is a couple hours a day. And I didn't get up. And I sat next to one of the teachers in the schoolroom. And I remember him saying, like, you're going to be here for a year. And I was just like, I remember saying F that to him, because I wouldn't get up. Because he's like, get up, get out of the chair, get out of this room, you know, go back to your dorm, stay with your buddy. And I was like, no, I'm staying right here. I want to call my mom. I wanted a phone call. I wanted to talk to her, because I didn't understand what was going on. We were not allowed to call our parents. And so I just remember sitting there and saying, F that. Like, I'm not going to be here for a year, because he told me, he's like, you're going to be here for a year. And he was angry when he said this to me. You know, it wasn't nice. And so I said F that, and his response was, we can get girls to floor you. And flooring.
Do you want to talk about flooring?
Yeah. Flooring is basically where they will take you and they will get the largest girls at Victory, not just, you know, in weight, but in height, and most of the time you're dragged to the Get Right room as this is happening. So you're not only being floored in the classroom, you could get floored in the classroom and then drugged to the Get Right room and then get floored in the Get Right room again. So flooring is basically, they take the biggest girls and they have them, the staff members and the girls will sit on you, on top of you as you're lying flat on your stomach. And then they will get a bar of soap and shove it in your mouth and hold it there.
Oh my God, that's awful. And what happens if a girl tried to refuse the soap in her mouth or tries to fight? Was there an incident?
They would get
her teeth knocked out? What happened with that?
There was a student that I had talked to where she was getting floored and she was fighting back hard against getting floored, and they were trying to shove the soap into her mouth, and she's gritting her teeth because she doesn't want the soap in her mouth. And shoved it so hard, rammed it in her mouth, that her 2 front teeth broke out.
Oh my God, that's awful. That's awful. And did you witness that, or that is something she had mentioned?
That is something that she had mentioned, but I've witnessed other girls being dragged by their hair to the Get Right room, like on their back, not having any control, not having anybody even pick them up under their arms and carry them. It was full on. She had very long hair down to her waist, and she had it back like this. And I remember the girl, and they took her by her hair and they grabbed it like this, and she is back like that, and they just dragged her across the carpet by her hair into the Get Right room.
That's awful. And let's just explain to the audience what happens when you get into this place. You are strip searched. There's no cameras. There's no video. I mean, you don't have your phones. There's no iPhones.
You don't have your cell phone, and you can't write to anybody else other than your parents. And the letters have to be on the up and up, as some of them.
Is it mandatory to write your parents?
Yes.
So
you have to
if
write
you
them 2 times a week.
Your parents because you're so upset because they locked you up in this place, what happened?
You want to vent to your parents. You know, that's your natural instinct to say, what have you done to me? Why am I here? Why am I in this place? Like,
sure.
You know, and for me, I did that. I was like, I don't understand. Why did you do this? And they destroy those letters. Those letters never make it out of Victory. And if they do make it out of Victory, if there's only some negative stuff, so maybe a couple sentences or 2, they will block it out with a Sharpie. So they can't even see what they write.
Let's say you were the type of kid that just didn't even want to talk to your parents. And you say, hey, I don't want to write my parents. What happens?
You're basically forced to write your parents, or you're given a demerit. And if you don't continue to write your parents, your demerits will pile up to the point of where you're going to have to go into the Get Right room. Because after a certain point of demerits, you miss. So Friday night, they had like like I was talking about on the podcast, they had special nights to where, and this wasn't a lot of fun, but this was something that if all the girls behaved, they could go to a Friday night and they would get a can of Coke and they would have, sweets, like sugary type of foods, and the girls would want to do that. If you had enough demerits, you didn't go to that. You went into the schoolroom while all of that was going on and you wrote lines, or you went into the get right room.
And Ramona, it was 7 demerits or more. But if you had under 7 demerits, so 6 or less, then you can go to Friday night. But if you had 7 or more, you could not. But it's so easy to rack up demerits in this hellhole because you couldn't talk about music, you couldn't talk about the movies. You had to say yes, ma'am, yes, sir, no, ma'am, no, sir. And the list goes on of what you can and cannot do if you just say yeah without saying yes, ma'am, or yes,
cool.
Sir. You get another demerit. It is so easy to get demerits, and we'll talk about that later. Right now, I want to touch base on the get right room.
Yeah, it was a room that it was the size of like a closet. It wasn't very big, had nothing on the walls, and a helper would sit not inside of the room, because the one at the school that I went to at Victory, it was like, like this, and they had a little room outside, but the closet door was open, so they would put the girls in a closet, and it smelled like pee when you went in there, because I was in there for a week. It smelled like pee because you had to get permission to go to the bathroom. There was not a bathroom in that area.
Permission to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Can you imagine having to ask permission to go to the bathroom, or being denied a simple privilege to urinate or to have a bowel movement? You have to ask permission, or it's designated on their time.
And a lot of times what they would do was they would give these girls cups of water. So they would drink cups of water throughout the day and have to go. And then the helper would play dumb and be like, you don't have to go to the bathroom, you're a faker. Just sit in there. And so girls would urinate themselves.
Welcome to Victory Christian Academy. So It could be the smallest mistake according to their rule book. And they didn't even have a rule book. It was just whatever they said is a rule is a rule.
So you'd have to memorize what all the rules were, and if you didn't, you would get a demerit. There were no second chances. It wasn't like, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. It was automatic demerit.
Can you talk about the demerits again? Let's talk about the bathroom, and let's talk about a demerit. So if you're in the middle of the night, did you have an alarm system that crisscrossed?
We didn't have a laser, but we had sensors on the floor to where they could tell if you were up in the middle of the night.
Okay, so you had sensors on the floor. We had a crisscross that looked like Tron. Same difference. If you get out, the alarm will just go off, and it is loud. It is so loud. It'll wake up the dead. Let's say you had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. What happens?
You would have to wake up a helper to escort you to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and that would be an automatic demerit. So
now you're being punished to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. So you would have to hold it the whole night till the next morning to go to the bathroom.
So I want the audience to picture this. You're in the movie theater, and it's a really good movie, and you don't want to leave because there's an important scene coming up, but you have to go to the bathroom so bad because you just drank so much that you have to go to the bathroom. Well, you have that luxury to do that if you want to or not. Not at Victory Christian Academy.
No.
You're having to go to the bathroom so bad, but you can't because there's a repercussion for it. And remember, these demerits are due 24 hours from within, and you're not just getting one, but many. And they could stack up and double and triple and quadruple. Mackenzie, I cannot believe that they are designating when you can and cannot go to the bathroom. It's terrible. So what would happen next? Were girls just going to the bathroom inside the get right room?
They would pretty much go to the bathroom on themselves, and then there's always a chance of when the girls did that they would get paddled. They would be brought into the office and they would paddle them.
Oh my God.
I was never paddled, but further along in the program I was a chapel helper, and the office sits right off the chapel. so I could hear it.
Oh my God. That was going to be my next question. Are you
Yeah.
hearing screaming throughout your stay at Victory?
Yeah.
Now let's just paint another picture, because I want people to really understand. And this is a cult. They just took on the flag of Christianity. So here you were, you're used to hearing hymns in church at your Methodist church. Everything was loving, peace, and Jesus, and God was nice and fluffy. And here you are hearing screaming, okay, throughout your stay. And what is an association? Was there somebody playing the piano?
They would only play hymnal music. They wouldn't play. So we're being very particular. There were not
Secular music. Yes, no,
yes,
it's
secular music. They did not allow that in Victory. So some of the songs that you were used to worshiping, singing, you could not sing those in Victory.
Right,
it was old hymnal.
A worldly song. So there was no Madonna. Well, this is my time.
Yeah.
And our time today. There's no Madonna. There's no Pink. You couldn't talk about Fleetwood Mac. You couldn't even talk about Amy Grant. We'll get into that later.
Yeah. I remember bringing up Amy Grant, and I got yelled at and a demerit for bringing up Amy Grant. Because I was like, we couldn't even bring up Amy Grant. And I'm like, she's a Christian artist. And Palmer hated her.
She was too worldly.
Yes.
According to this place. I mean, this place was crazy. Okay, so that's the world. Now you're starting to come into the world of Victory Christian Academy. And you're hearing screaming. Are you hearing hymnals while someone's screaming? While girls are being tortured? Do you hear scripture being recited while girls are being tortured? What is going on?
Yes, they would be on the pulpit and preach and be giving a very hard, stern sermon to the girls. And what I mean by that is they would call the girls whores. They would call the girls out for being too fat, because they said that gluttony was a sin. And so girls that were too fat in the program, they would say that they're gluttonous, and that's a sin. And so they would be preaching at these girls. I mean, it was an attack on these girls. It was not what you would think of as a sermon. And then there would be girls crying in the background, because I remember that one girl was dragged to the Get Right room by her hair because she didn't want to go to chapel. And so we couldn't even look over and notice this girl. I saw her out of the corner of my eye. I was on the end chair. And so I saw her go right by me. But they told me, they said, oh, keep your eyes to yourself, because you're going to get a demerit. You could get 500 lines or 1,000 lines if you looked at.
You couldn't even look at another girl.
Yeah. You couldn't look at another girl when any of that was happening. There was a girl who tried to run in Victory when I was there. And
why?
Yeah. And the door happened to be open because the helpers were doing manual labor outside with the staff. And so the door was kind of propped open for the helpers to come in, and she bolted outside, and they tackled her and drug her back in. But I remember some of the girls that were new, that did not know, do not look, they all kind of craned their necks and turned around. And they had a helper that sat there with a notebook and jotted down every single name of the girls who turned their head. And they each got 1,000 lines.
Oh my God, that's awful. That's awful. So you are conditioned now to be an untouchable. So now you have associations, which are now triggers to trauma. These are triggers to trauma. So every time you hear a preacher, every time you go into a church, every time you hear a hymnal, you will have an association for the rest of your life.
And I had association with the colors of the shirts.
I'm sorry?
I had association with the colors of the shirts. For years, I couldn't wear the color yellow because it reminded me of Buddy.
Oh, no.
So I couldn't wear the color yellow. I couldn't wear the color pink. Pink was separation. If you got too close to girls at Victory, they would put you on separation. And that meant that if you looked at each other, you had to look down. So you're coming in the cafeteria looking down. You're facing the wall. You're away from the group. If you notice the other girl or make contact, I mean, it's brutal.
So now you're conditioning. They are conditioning you to make you feel like you're an untouchable to society. Because when you put your head down, And when you can't even look up at another human being, what do you think that does? Triggers to trauma. You have to put your head down so you can feel that you're unworthy to God and also to everybody else in this world, to society. And that's sad. It's really sad.
Just because you get off buddy does not mean that you cannot go back on buddy. If you're not flowing along with the program, they will orange shirt you, and they give you an orange shirt, and that means the girls have gotten off of buddy, but they did something to get them back on buddy, and so they will orange shirt them. And that's almost worse than being off on buddy to begin with.
So right now, you're describing the hierarchy at Victory Christian Academy. You're describing buddy, you're describing a helper, you're describing a different color shirt for separation, and it is a way to visually have other girls bully other girls. Your target now to be bullied by other girls and by staff. They're orchestrating this whole thing for children to abuse other children. And that is wrong. This is illegal to do this at all, period. This is child abuse. But yet it continues in all these programs today.
And they would hold rap sessions every Sunday.
I want you to describe a rap session to me. What goes on in these rap sessions? Can you please describe it?
Yeah, so a staff member will get with the helpers, which are dorm helpers, the highest ones on the rank, and basically they have a meeting pre this day, so pre-Sunday, and they will kind of go over what girls are not acting right. And this is all up to interpretation of what the dorm helpers believe.
Right.
So if a girl, girls don't always get along together, no matter what. Sometimes, you don't like a girl for whatever reason. And some of these girls did not like certain girls. And because they were put back on buddy or were on buddy or, weren't flowing well enough in the program, they would get together and they would say the meanest, hateful things that I've ever heard come out of a human's mouth.
Where you're having a child take care of another child. Which brings me to free labor, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I want to go back to the rap session. So they're getting free labor. So other girls are watching other girls, so to speak, in the dorms instead of staff. But staff watch too. But within the dorm setting, they're being watched all the time.
Yes.
And they're allowed to do whatever the hell they want to other children.
Yes.
And it's all orchestrated by the pastor that's running the place. So let's go back to the rap session. Tell me what else is going on here.
They would get out there and call the girls, say that they're, hateful to their parents, they're disobedient to their parents, they're disgraces to their parents, that their parents don't love them, that they're surprised that their parents even write to them. And that's another thing. They will take your letters from you and tell you that your parents don't love you, because that happened to me.
Oh, that's so sad. And when they're saying these negative affirmations, do they have the Bible open?
A lot of times they'll have the Bible open, and I remember these rap sessions were held in the cafeteria over a loudspeaker into a microphone.
My God. And are they praying too right before the session?
They'll pray before the session.
Okay, so what kind of association do you think people are having, or these kids are having, with praying?
They're having a negative affirmation towards the praying. Like, who would want to pray when you're connecting abuse to prayers?
Exactly. So now it's trigger to trauma. Again, another trigger to trauma. Okay, I just want to point all this out. I want to color a picture of what it was like. I want the audience to be inside Victory Christian Academy right now to understand what we are talking about and what we're fighting for right now. We are going to get in there and color. Okay?
Yeah.
So, what else? This is a rap session. They are doing negative affirmations in the name of God. They have their Bibles open. There was a prayer before it. Are girls crying?
Girls would cry. They would hold their hands in their face, but they made them drop their hands. They had to stand up and all in front of all the other girls So you had a whole cafeteria full of girls, and Victory, when I went there, it got up to having almost 100 girls in there at one time. So you have 100 girls, and you had to have one girl, the girl who was being yelled at, she would stand up, and then they would be on a loudspeaker and a microphone screaming these obscenities at her. And then they would take turns. They would the helpers and staff would tag team each other and get on the mic. So it's not just one girl. You could have a whole row of girls, and the staff member would say, is there anybody else that needs to say something to this person?
Do you know what amazes me is the way these programs advertise building self-esteem, building parent-daughter relationships or parent-son relationships, depending on if you're in a boys' camp.
Right.
It's nothing of the sort. All they're doing is saying your parents hate you, you're a disgrace to your family, you are a home wrecker. I heard that plenty of times. Yes. Home wrecker, you're a whore, you're a Jezebel, and just because you say it, a word from the Bible, Jezebel, doesn't make it right. You're still calling someone a whore. Anything else?
The spare the rod, spoil the child was used a lot, and so that's how they justified paddling girls and taking girls down and flooring them.
Okay. Mackenzie, have you heard the preachers say breaking the will of a child?
Yes, and they would tell you that their will needed to be broken so that God's will could be done for them. So that's what was told to me, and that meant basically they had to conform to this Christianity that they saw, not Christianity that I knew, but what they believed God accepted.
What happened to free will? Does free will exist at Victory Christian Academy?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Not even thinking.
So you are forced to be saved.
You're forced to be saved, because I remember girls. So what they would do was they would have the sermons where they would yell at the girls, and they would ask at the end of that sermon, does any girl want to accept Jesus Christ into her life? And a lot of girls were new on Buddy, so they were on yellow shirts. And if they wouldn't raise their hand, what they would do was you would raise your hand, and they would take you into the laundry room. And you would have two helpers in the laundry room try to shove the Bible in your face and have you profess that you were saved. So by the time you came out of that laundry room, you had to say in front of everyone, I'm saved. And then, they would all clap for you. But girls who did not do that, who did not raise their hand, who weren't professing that they were saved publicly in front of the church, would never get off Buddy.
What if I were Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist?
They didn't believe in those religions. Like they did.
What if I were that and I didn't want to be saved? What happens? I'm in the laundry room.
You're in the laundry room,
Would they drag me to the laundry room?
They would basically tell you in the laundry room that your religion isn't correct and it's not right and it's not the word of God. And they would either, at that point, if you chose not to be saved in the laundry room, if you made a choice not to be saved,
what happens?
You painted a red target on your back that would be there for the rest of your year. And what I mean by that is all the helpers, you became in the spotlight. They would give you demerits. You would get a demerit quicker than you could turn your head.
Have no other recourse, pretty much, if you want to survive in this program, to their doctrine. And that's sad, because it should be a choice. Mackenzie, I would like to get into other things that you had witnessed in this lockdown reform school. Let's talk about the free labor that they were getting. So not only is this $1 billion industry, right? Who was doing the laundry? Who was doing all the cooking? Who was doing all the yard work outside and digging ditches? Do you want to fill me in on what was going on over there?
Yeah, so you had students, basically girls of Victory, were doing all of the yard work. They would do all of the labor. They would, when I was there, we would lift heavy rocks. So they would have the girls take these big, huge rocks and build a waterfall in the back near the pool, because they wanted it to look nice for graduation for girls who graduated through the ACE program. And the only way you could graduate through the ACE program was if you had already been there for a year and you had finished all of your paces, and then you were deemed for graduation and could leave.
So I have another question. While all these girls are doing hard labor outside, was there any water outside? Did they have a cooler with water outside? If you were
No,
thirsty,
not that I remember.
did you
I remember
run all the way back inside, grab some water, and then run back outside and continue working? What happened?
they had if I can remember correctly, a cooler in the kitchen area. So you would have to ask to go back into the kitchen area and get water. And they had designated water breaks.
And
so even if you were thirsty,
how long did that take? Like
to go from
to walk from the yard to the other area?
I want to say at least 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, so you're walking. I'm just trying to paint a picture. You go get your water, and now I was practically running. I would run to go get water and then run to get back to work.
And
so think that was happening. I was dehydrated.
Yeah, it took a long ways to get to the cafeteria, because if you were out back lifting up the stones and doing the waterfall, the kitchen was on the opposite end of the property. So you'd have to go back in and try to go as fast as you could. And you couldn't run through Victory because they didn't know if girls were escaping, right? Or if they were trying to do whatever. So you had to fast-paced walk, but not run. Yeah.
Right. So every time you were thirsty, you had to ask permission, get your water, come back and work. There was nothing, no cooler or anything like that. And to top it off, what kind of a paycheck did you receive for doing this? Because when I was a kid, I used to work at McDonald's and a clothing store, and I had a paycheck. Did you have a paycheck?
No. And there were girls, none of the girls in there got paid for doing heavy manual labor. And what I mean by heavy manual labor, it was not just sweeping and mopping and scrubbing dishes. It was lifting stones, building decks, building things that they wanted, the lattices in the garden area, anything to make it look nice. I had to scrub out they had like a fountain out in front, and I had to scrub out the fountain and lift up the fountain, and it was more than 50 pounds. And I was told to do this, by myself. There was another helper, but, girls were doing construction work for free.
Any hard hats?
No protective equipment.
Okay,
sometimes,
go ahead.
Sometimes the girls would be given gloves. Like, I do know that they were given gloves for lifting rocks. But in that instance, you almost didn't want to wear the gloves because they were so worn down that the rocks would slip out from your hands if you put them down.
Let's go over prison real quick. In prison, what is it, $10 a day or something like that? I mean, it's not that much, but they're getting something. I don't mind volunteering my time for a church. Prior to Victory Christian Academy, I used to volunteer my time all the time, but that was my choice. And they weren't abusing little girls inside my church at home. They weren't abusing girls inside the church. I happily wanted to volunteer for that. Victory, you better pay me to do this, okay?
And because can you also say that this is Florida?
In fact, I think they owe me and you a lot of money for what we went through. So slavery. So it's not even a sweatshop. A sweatshop, they at least get paid something.
Yeah, you do not get paid anything. And can we reiterate that this is Florida? It's hot. And you're under the sun all day. There was no shade or anything to protect you from the heat. Wow. You weren't given hats. You weren't given sunscreen.
No sunscreen?
No sunscreen, no hats. All of that was a luxury. I think in medicine cabinet, if you had asked for it, your parents had to put so much money on the books to get it. But I don't ever remember wearing sunscreen at Victory doing labor outside. I don't remember it being given out at all.
I don't remember it either. I don't remember that either. So no water, no sunscreen, no hats. Let's go, and no hard hats in construction. Speaking of hard hats, let's talk about Carrie Dunn. Carrie Dunn died in 1988 when I was there. I was in Ramona, California in 1988. She died on the property, building a church with no construction hat. She had no construction hat on. And a helicopter came in on the compound, and I thought they were going to rescue us out. I really thought they were going to rescue us out, and they didn't. You can look up that article. I'll have that in a clip. But she died because of Victory Christian Academy's negligence, and yet he was able to open up another facility in Mexico, and we'll get into that later, and another one in Florida, which is Victory Christian Academy, and they rebranded it to Lighthouse. Okay. Mackenzie, can you tell me a little bit of what you know about Carrie Dunn and what you've heard?
What I heard directly from Palmer, and Palmer would preach and talk about Carrie Dunn a lot. In fact, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there was actually a song written about Carrie Dunn.
Oh my God, that's crazy.
And the girls would sing the song about a girl who died at Victory, and we were, forced to sing the song, and it was just kind of odd. Her death was very odd to me from the way it was told. So they said that she was working on building the new church, and they said that they had a donkey, and a donkey is kind of a V-shaped platform that would hold wood inside of it. And so instead of them grabbing the wood from the floor and dragging it to the roof, they could have it off the side of the roof and just reach over, grab it, and bring it up to the roof. What we were told was that she was underneath it or near it or on top of it, something, and it collapsed and the lumber fell on her, and that she died in his arms.
And he kept that story with us too, and I'll never forget it because she died on the property, and he called all of us girls into chapel and told us that now Carrie Dunn is in a good place. She's with the Lord. And not too long ago, he was making her out to be a heathen and telling everyone that she's here for the second time because she didn't listen to her parents, and she's going about the ways of the world and instead of following what he taught her. And now all of a sudden she's with the Lord. And he did say, don't get any funny ideas, girls, because her parents aren't going to do anything to me. Because I seriously thought at that point social services was going to come in. They were going to take us out. I was going to be rescued. Nope, that didn't happen at all. What happened was he said that it was God's will. She's in a better place. And her parents, this is what he said to all of us, that her parents said that I'd rather have her with Jesus than on the streets.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because that accident could have been prevented. And, what I say is they rule it an accident, but you almost wonder, the equipment was on the school's property. That's negligence. And so when you're forcing a student to do construction work when they don't know how to work with it, and they don't know how to, she was building a church. I don't know what student knows how to build a church at, that age. I don't. And so to be forced to work on the church, she didn't have a choice to do that. And so if anything happened, it really did seem like negligence.
If we had oversight from the state, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Okay. Let's go into sex abuse. Let's go into the rape with Ramirez.
Yeah.
And you can kind of connect the dots of Carrie Dunn and Ramirez. I don't know what happened really with Carrie Dunn. I only know what was told by the pastor from a darker dimension. Why don't you go ahead and talk to us about Ramirez?
So I'm not sure if Ramirez was there when I was there or if she was there before me, but basically what happened was she accused Palmer of rape, but we all knew it was true. There wasn't a shadow of doubt in my mind that he did what he did. She accused him of rape, and there's an article about it. And she was saying that he was coming to her parents' house, offering her mom money. I think it was like $25,000 or something like that. And Palmer thought that he could buy Ramirez from her parents, and that he was offering them money, and he took them out to go to lunch, and this is what he was doing. He wanted to buy Ramirez.
Oh my God, that's awful. That's just.
And in the article, she said, well, you already have a wife. He already had a wife. And he said, well, it didn't count for whatever reason, that didn't count. But I know that she's telling the truth. Because all of the staff members, when that accusation came out, staff members that had been there for years, that were there in California, started packing up and leaving.
Wow. Okay, so we have free labor, we have rape going on in this place, we have a death.
Right.
We have beatings in the office.
Yep. You have beatings in the get right room.
Hymnals playing throughout this camp, so you have an association to Christian music and beatings and girls screaming. Would you say girls were screaming and crying during the day? Would you say 90% of the time?
Yeah, they were, and they were put. If you cried, so if you cried at Victory and you started crying too much, I was told to stop crying, or I would be sent to the get right room. So you couldn't even cry or write a journal or anything like that. That would be taken away from you. And like I said, I had gotten taken off the medication, and what happened was I started throwing up. And so I was throwing up so much. I was so weak, and I was heavy set back then. By the time I had got out of Victory, I was less than 150 pounds.
Oh my God.
And I was 200 pounds or more when I entered Victory.
And to lose that weight so rapidly like that could cause health issues.
By the time I had hit my 3 months, I had lost all that weight. So this wasn't done over a period of a year. It was in 3 months I had lost the weight from vomiting so much, because they took me off of the medication automatically. They didn't wean me off of the medication. They said, you don't need pills, you need the gospel. And they would not give me my depression medication. And so what happened was I went through a severe withdrawal, and then you were not allowed to vomit in that place. And I ended up vomiting on my food, and I was forced to eat my own vomit.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry, Mackenzie. That's awful. That's awful. So did they make you do it in front of all your peers?
Yes. If you vomited on a tray, what they would do is you had the option to either eat it, or they would freeze it in the freezer. It was cold. It was stone cold. I remember it was eggs that I was eating, and they brought it back to me stone cold. And as I peeled the film off, because they put in saran wrap, I peeled it off, and my vomit was still on the tray. And I remember a helper yelling at me. She said, you need to eat it, or you're going to get it saved again. There was food there that was saved for over a week straight. And this is breakfast. This is eggs, stuff that you do not save for a week.
Oh my God, that's awful. That's awful. And so what did you, and you ended up eating it?
I was forced to eat my own vomit from a staff member, because I remember they were yelling at me. They were like, you're not going to keep doing this. And they threatened to start my time over, because they said I was a faker, because they said that the withdrawals were not true and I was faking it in the program. So I was forced to eat my own vomit.
How the hell could you be faking it when nobody wants to vomit and then eat their own vomit? You can't possibly be faking it. Was there any medical staff on board? No, I was told that I was a faker. I remember being so weak.
I had to be helped out of my bunk bed to go to lunch.
Oh my
just
God.
to eat the same eggs again.
And they didn't think anything was wrong with that?
No, they thought I was a faker. They told me to my face that I was a faker and I wasn't right with God, and that, he would start my time over. And that's when they started taking my parents' letters. So not only am I writing my parents 2 times a week, I'm not getting any letters incoming. He told me that my parents didn't love me, that they didn't care anymore, and they wanted nothing to do with me. And so I wasn't even getting any letters from my parents because he had taken them from me. He instructed every staff member to take those letters from me and tell me that my parents didn't love me.
Oh my God, that's awful. Awful. So you have more rights in minimum and maximum security prison. You could have written whoever you wanted. You could have had visitors. You could have had a phone call. I think you can have visitors twice a week in prison. I don't know. I'm not an expert because I haven't been to prison before. Imagine that. We didn't even have misdemeanors, for God's sake. And yet we were treated worse than minimum and maximum security prison.
You had to be in there for 90 days before you could get a visit from your parents, and that all depended on how you acted in those first 90 days. They could cancel your visit at the drop of a hat. As far as phone calls were monitored. There was staff on the other end of the phone. So they had a phone. Your parents would call into Victory. The staff member would pick up the phone. They would connect it to the dorm, because there was, outside of the dorm, there was a phone, but you could not call out. There were girls that picked up and tried to dial out. It connected back to the main office, so you couldn't call out of there and call for help and report abuse or report anything going on. And if you said something on the call, they would drop it. They would disconnect you from your parents.
So no communication. And anytime you wanted to communicate, you couldn't express your emotions. They were almost creating mindless droids.
Yeah, and the girls were really brainwashed.
I want to ask you a question. Do you have a problem with expressing your emotions?
Yeah.
You feel like a mindless droid when it comes to your emotion? Because
you weren't allowed to have emotions at Victory. I mean, the emotions you were allowed to have at Victory, they designated for you. Like, if you didn't smile enough, they would walk by and be like, "What's wrong? Do you need to get right with God? Why aren't you smiling? This is a happy place." So you couldn't even control or regulate your own emotions.
Exactly. You were ordered to smile. And I want to run something real quick for the audience.
This was one of my first visits from my parents at Victory. I was still on Buddy, and I had to fake a smile to go along in the program.
Mackenzie, can you tell me a little bit about girls being faced to the wall and standing at a pole for hours on end? Did you ever witness anything like that?
There was girls, they didn't put them to the pole when I was there because the pole was outside, and if you had a girl that they thought were acting up, they wouldn't put them outside. But there were girls that were faced to the wall in chapel specifically. So in chapel, while they are preaching at you and saying all these horrible, things, you have to sit at attention and stare at the pastor as he's doing this. You cannot look away. You cannot be distracted. If you tap your hand too much, they will call you out. And what they'll do is saying, "Oh, Mackenzie, you're not paying attention. Get up." And they'll have you get up, and you will have to face the wall the entire chapel service.
What happens if you try to sit down because you're just to stand on hours on end?
You're going to be brought to the Get Right room, or you're going to get 1,000 lines or more. You have to do it. It is crucial. They will have girls help you up. I remember a staff member telling a girl, because she had stood there for so long, this is an hour-long sermon or more, she had stood there so long she was getting tired, and they had her hold books and the Bible along with it, so she's holding heavy stuff, and they said, "If you can't stand up, I'll have girls help you." Helping, it wasn't a kind gesture.
Right.
They were going to grab her and keep her upright.
Wow, that's awful and torturous. Can you explain the Get Right room on the duration? Were girls locked in isolation for days, weeks, and months at a time? Did you witness that?
Yeah, I remember several girls gotten too many demerits that were placed in the Get Right room for months.
So now, months.
Yeah. They would be...
And they're urinating and They have bowel movements
Unless the
inside.
roll-off's playing.
I'm sorry?
And Lester Roloff's playing on a loudspeaker.
Yeah, talk about Lester Roloff. Lester Roloff is the mastermind behind this cult. He started it in 1968 with the Rebecca Home for Girls. This is all interconnected, even with the Circle of Hope, which we're trying to close down. Mm-hmm. So Rebecca Home for Girls, New Bethany, the Hephzibah House that just closed down after being open for almost 5 decades. 5 decades. New Bethany, Hephzibah House, Circle of Hope, Rebecca Homes for Girls, and Very Christian, which was rebranded to the Lighthouse, and Genesis by the Sea.
Right.
Days, weeks, months at a time. At least in minimum and maximum security prison, we could have made a phone call to an attorney.
Right. And all of the girls that were in the Get Right room for the period that they were in the Get Right room, whether they were in there for months, weeks, they got no visits. So your visit would be stripped from you. If you got put into the Get Right room for that period of time, you would get no visits.
Wow.
No.
So not only are you in isolation, which you're already isolated anyway, just going through the program.
Right.
And you're listening to preaching all day long. Abusive preaching. It's not just normal preaching. This is abusive preaching that's going on. You're a whore. You're a home wrecker. You're a disgrace to God. You're an abomination.
Yeah.
All day long. I want to paint a picture of what this place is like. Mackenzie, okay, so you're being monitored. You have eyes and ears throughout the dorms.
Yeah.
You have staff all around, and they're always finding fault in what you are doing. You're breaking the rule. There's always a rule being broke. And I'm talking biting your nails. I'm talking maybe your drawers weren't straightened enough. These are not normal rules.
You could get a demerit if you asked to pluck your eyebrows and you lost the clippers. Like some girls would have their shirt and they would put the clippers or the tweezers on their shirt collar just to go back into the dorm with instead of, putting them in their pockets. And I remember one time, I lost one of those and I panicked because I knew it was immediate 1,000 lines. I ended up finding it, but they would give you, you had to turn it back in within 24 hours. So you didn't get it for a long period of time. There was a checklist that the girls would sign in, check stuff out, and which would be basically tweezers, and then they would have to check that in that 24-hour period. Meanwhile, you have to ask.
24 hours, it would, double, triple, quadruple?
Yeah. Full, triple, but you had to ask a staff member to pluck, and you had to designate time for a helper to watch you pluck. You couldn't just pluck your eyebrows on your own. You had to have a helper stand next to you as you're plucking your eyebrows, making sure your eyebrows aren't too thin.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, just control. You were just being controlled all the time, and you were always afraid of making a mistake. You were always on edge, and those demerits, you were consumed. So the education definitely wasn't there. What are we getting, 2 or 3 hours?
Yeah.
Pace?
Yeah, that's maximum. Yeah, paces. And if you didn't finish, certain amount of paces per day, like the pages and the paces, you were given a certain amount of pages that they thought you could complete. But this was given to you, and if you struggled in school or you had a learning disability, you would rack up demerits very quickly because you had to do a certain amount of pages, and those had to be checked. And if, they had to be perfect, and if they were not perfect and checked, then you would get a demerit on your desk the next day.
And you also had to memorize Bible verses, too. So let's talk about the Bible verses. There's a punishment tacked onto that. Now, I went to a private Christian school prior to Victory Christian Academy called Cornerstone Christian. Mm-hmm. And I had an A in Bible. I loved Bible class. Yeah. I memorized, but if you had a problem memorizing, you would be in trouble. You would get demerits, and those would double, triple, and quadruple if you didn't memorize. And so you're always on edge. If you
and then you could go into the Get Right room if you didn't do your verses. So if you just flat out refuse to not do your verses, you're going to be put in the get right room. I didn't have a problem memorizing. I had an impeccable memory, and that's why Victory is really hard for me to go back to, because the memory is very vivid of the place. But, when I was there, I was able to memorize verses very quickly. And these verses weren't, verses that you already knew. They were cherry picked out of the Bible. They were completely random. And then you would have to go to a staff member and say it in front of a staff member, and they would sign them off that you had completed them. But if you messed up saying them one time, then they would say, no, you haven't learned this, go back and do it. But there were pages of verses that you had to remember.
So now there's an association of the Bible and scripture and punishment. It's another PTSD. It's another association. Let's talk about separation once again. Separation is when you get too close to a girl, meaning a friend. You couldn't make friends. It was designed so you couldn't make friends in this place.
Right.
So here you are. You cannot make friends in this place. I was just memorizing back and forth I picked a partner, and I could do something normal like I would do in a Christian school. No, not at Victory.
No.
Memorizing back and forth scripture. And I thought, well, we can't get in trouble. We're talking about God. That's all we were talking about was God. That was it. God and the scripture. But because we were getting too close, because we were going back and forth and doing this every day until we got it down.
All of your conversations were listened to.
Right.
All of your conversations were listened to. So, for instance, in a dorm, like Love was a big dorm, and I was in Love for a period of time, and if you were on the opposite end of the room, you had to have a helper down there. There were like 2 or 3 dorm helpers per dorm, so you had to have a dorm helper listening on each end of the conversations to make sure that they were on the up and up, to make sure they were godly things were being said. I remember one girl said how she missed her Doc Martens from home, and they instantly gave her lines for that because she missed wearing Doc Martens, and they associated that with sin.
Right. You couldn't talk about movies. You couldn't talk about music. You couldn't talk about friends from the outside world. And I had friends that were Christian. I could not talk about them.
Yeah.
I couldn't mention their names. I couldn't mention a conversation. We couldn't talk about the abuse that was going on in this place. Yeah. We couldn't say anything negative about what the preacher was doing. Oh my God, do you think this is weird? This place is crazy. You couldn't vent and say, hey, Mackenzie, you know what? They're really abusing people in the name of God. This is not Christian. If I were to say something like that, what would happen to me?
Basically, what would happen to you is I know what would happen to me is I would have gone to the get right room. I would have been floored. I would have gotten soap in my mouth. They threatened to start my time over just based off of the simple fact that I was throwing up. So they could start your time over at Victory. And what that was is...
Did they correlate all that to being a heathen?
Yeah.
And that's sad. That is despicable. And if you're a Christian and you're watching this, you should be... I need to choose my choice of words carefully. You should be quite angered about this place and places like this. Okay.
And if there was a night that you wanted to go to, so Friday night, if they would announce what Friday night was going to be the Friday, the Saturday before, I think it was. And let's say you could only get so many lines before you would miss Friday night. Having to get up and go to the bathroom could be the nail in the coffin for you missing Friday night.
Right. And it's also a form of humiliation, too. So let's get into Friday night. Friday night is the only special time that we ever had at Victory Christian Academy. And you still couldn't speak your mind. So the First Amendment's taken away, no matter if it's Friday night or not. But what you had were, pop and cookies and candy and treats and all the wrong foods, junk food, popcorn,
Right.
you name it, it was there.
Right.
And it was just an escape if you go through it and you're going through this war, so to speak, of the program. Is it really an escape?
Yeah.
You could talk about Madonna accidentally during a social conversation or whatever it is that you're talking about in the outside world, a friend, and you mess up because you think, oh, this is a friendly Friday night and we're having
Right.
it's girls talking. No, unless you're talking about the Bible or a verse or what God is doing in your life, you can't talk about it. So the First Amendment is taken from you.
And you could mess up really easy on Friday night because you still had to follow all the rules, but you would let your guard down a little bit and relax as you're drinking a soda or as you're eating this food.
Right?
And you could just mess up and say, oh, remember that song on the radio or whatever, and automatic demerit. And then I remember girls who got called out on that, and we would have to physically pick up our chairs and move away from them. We would have to isolate ourselves from them.
Wow. Isn't that sad? Because if you were associated with somebody who was worldly or talked about, something that this pastor considered heathen, which
Right.
is something normal that a kid would say, a nice kid would say, even a goody two-shoes would say, it wasn't respected at Victory Christian Academy. It was a different kind of world, a different dimension. And separation, how many feet did you have to be away from someone you were separated with?
All the way on the opposite end of the room. If you were in chapel, there was like chairs here, and there was the aisle in chapel. And if one girl was on separation, she would have to sit here. The other girl would have to sit on the opposite end.
What if I accidentally went to the same, the bathroom, and I didn't know it, and the girl I was on separation with was in the bathroom? What would happen to me?
Oh, you'd be given lines, or you would go to the get right room. They would yell at you for that. You were not allowed to get within so many feet of that person, and so they.
An accident happens, and you don't know it, and you're not aware of it. You could still get punished.
There are no accidents at Victory, that's what they would say. So even if it is an accident on your part, just walking into a bathroom and the girl's in there, you would still, I remember both of them getting it. So not only would you get it, even if it was an accident, girl you were on separation, they would get it, and vice versa.
So this program, would you say, set up, you couldn't have a relationship with your parents. You can't have a relationship with any of the girls in there because you could be on separation. And that can make your life a living hell.
Yeah.
So you're alone, pretty much alone in this program. Alone.
And you couldn't know where the girls came from either. And we were told that we can't contact the girls afterwards. So the fact that me and you are talking is wonderful, because a lot of girls were able to connect afterwards because we were told we were never supposed to do that.
Right. I mean, this is a preacher from a darker dimension. He told us that we weren't allowed to contact each other at all.
Yeah.
And it's sad. And the reason why is because he didn't want us to put our heads together and realize that we were being abused.
Yes.
And open our mouths about it so we can report him.
And I think that was the main reason that they did that at Victory. Because at that point, then you could have all of these girls say, remember when Mackenzie had to eat her own vomit? I remember that. And they'll write it down or they'll talk about it. And, it can blow up. And so to prevent that, he had to physically separate these girls from knowing anything about each other to prevent that from happening.
Do you want to tell us brainwashing that took place in Victory as far as convincing girls that this program you will be nothing without this program? You will be nothing if you go back to your old ways. What, wearing red lipstick? Old ways. What was I doing? Oh, I was on an honor roll mention. Should I not go back to my old ways?
girls couldn't talk to girls who had gone home before their year. So if they had gone home before their year and they were pulled from the program because their parents found out somehow, their parents would come on a visit. They could come into the school. But if they found out and they pulled their daughter from the program, we could never mention that student's name again or know anything about her in the school. Right. So, for instance, for me, the first time I was at Victory, I was there for 13 months, and then the second time I was back at Victory, so I went back.
Second time, I want to know how you did not jump out of the vehicle.
I was still brainwashed, so I was like, there was only a 3-month period of me being out of Victory.
Did you die, and that's how you got out of Victory? Can you tell the audience about this story, because this is very important. So here you are, you're not even weaned off this medication. It's turkey, it's the Bible, and that's it. They're not giving you smaller doses and gradually getting you off.
Right. And
you're vomiting, profusely vomiting, and then you're being forced to eat your own vomit, which is awful. Yeah. So whatever toxins were coming out of your system, now you're forced to eat that.
Yeah. And I had to carry a bucket around with me as a form of humiliation, not only because I was just throwing up so much, and there were times where I would walk around and I wouldn't puke, but I had to physically carry a bucket with me. And so I remember some of the staff members calling me, I'm sorry.
Okay. Take your time.
They called me Bucket Girl.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?
Yeah, it was just really hard.
It's awful, awful. And these are supposed to be Christians.
Yeah.
Follow Christ. Christ would never do something like that.
And I got so sick.
It should make people angry, no matter what religion they are, or if they're an atheist. It should make everybody, whether you're a Christian, Jewish, I don't care. This should make everybody angry, because that is not spiritual.
And in the middle of all of that, you're being yelled at and called a faker, and you're having names thrown your way. I remember when I was heavy, one of the staff members, because my name's Mackenzie, he would call me Big Mac, and he thought it was funny. And I couldn't do anything to tell him, stop, I don't like that name, Big Mac. Don't call me that. But he would call me that.
You couldn't even defend yourself.
Yeah.
You had to keep your mouth shut, which we're going to talk about the brainwashing here in a minute, because you can't open your mouth. You can't talk about the abuse. You're being conditioned not to talk about the abuse. So what do you think is going to happen when you get out into the outside world? This is the best thing that ever happened to me. This is where I found God. And these are wonderful people. And you are nothing without this program. This is what saved my life. Is that what happened to you?
Yeah. When I got out of Victory after 13 months, when I was home for those 3 months, I remember my mom, she had talked to another mother who her daughter was struggling, and I'm not even sure what she was struggling with, but she wanted to put her daughter somewhere, so she asked me to talk to this parent to convince her to put her in Victory. And I was home at the time, and I told her, I said, Victory is the best thing that ever happened to me. All those people were wonderful. And so for a very long time, I denied what happened to me. I knew what had happened to me, but I was so brainwashed that I thought that these people did the right thing. And it took years for me to realize that was all abuse.
It was programming. They were programming you and conditioning you to feel this way. And you were marketing Victory. They had us programmed so we can market them, and they seriously, every time they pray, thank you, God, for this ministry and for allowing me to be a light to the girls in this program. They're not a light to the girls in these programs. They're the dark. They're the dark side. Okay? and I'm going to exploit that. And we're exploiting it right now as we speak. So, Mackenzie, you're a mindless droid. It's almost as if they took your soul.
Yeah.
It's almost as if they took your soul.
I felt very numb to everything. I didn't really have, I almost developed disassociation with trauma. And so I chalked it up to, oh, they were helping me. And I would go out and say, and it was so weird because I would go up to people who I didn't know and just start rambling and preaching the Bible to them. And for these people, they were like, what is wrong with this girl? Why is she coming up to me? And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Christianity, but I was just so brainwashed that I would go up to random people that I didn't know and just keep rattling on, and I didn't even know these people.
Because you were conditioned by this pastor that everybody's going to hell. Everybody's going to hell, and if you don't tell them about the Word of God, that they're going to go to hell. And that's sad.
I feel sorry for a lot of these girls because I don't think whether it's a defense mechanism or whatever it is, whether it's too hurtful to deal with, I don't think the girls that come out and say that it's the best thing that's happened to them, there's two things that can happen, and that's either they were a helper and they weren't, touched as much, meaning they weren't given demerits as much, or they got special treatment, and there was preferential treatment in there. Certain staff members liked certain girls, and they would let them get away with more stuff than the other girls.
And they were convinced that everybody else who was underneath them were heathens.
Yes.
And that they were bad girls. Because this preacher was telling everybody, well, she's a lesbian, so you can't associate yourself with. Birds of a feather flock together. That just stuck in my head. Yes. And so you couldn't flock with somebody who was a lesbian. That is so opposite of what Christianity is supposed to be. And that is how girls are brainwashed. And if you help her, you're conditioned that everybody beneath you they're wrong. And it's almost like they feel like they deserved it.
Yeah. And I remember one helper telling me to eat my own vomit, that I was a faker. So not only is saying it, but what Paul would say the girls would pick up against you. So it was like, follow the leader. He would say it, other girls would follow. So you're not only being yelled at by staff, you're being yelled at by helpers also. Right. And girls who were not helpers. The girls that were not helpers wanted to climb the ladder to become a helper, so they might be mean to you and get on this pedestal because they figure if I act this way, I might get made a helper too. So it's not just helpers.
Right. And the other thing is it's a survival mechanism too. So if you are a helper, well, you're saving yourself in a way because you're not picked on, you're not a target anymore, you're not being bullied.
Right.
You have special privileges, and with those special privileges, you're not off the hook yet. You still can't talk about the world. The First Amendment still doesn't exist, but the point is you're not a target anymore. And I think girls that weren't a target throughout their stay think it's the best thing that ever happened to them.
Yeah. And if they went through abuse, they're probably holding it in. And I know I've seen a lot of abuse happen that they've written about, but they're just too afraid to come forward and talk about it.
Even if they are a helper, that's abuse. If you're a helper, that's abuse.
Yeah.
Because it's being dictated to abuse another child, to climb up a ladder. You actually were abused if you were a helper in one of these places. But you just don't realize it.
And not only that, but them participating in abuse of other girls. So for instance, the helpers helping to floor another girl. You don't know what that does to a helper, because a lot of times there will be helpers there that don't want to floor a girl, Every once in a while you would get a good, nice girl who did not want to do it, but because she was automatically given this helper status, she had to do it. She had to witness it.
Did you have to do it, Mackenzie?
I had to give a demerit to a girl who, and it was 1,000-line demerit, and I did not want to give it to her. I thought that the demerit was ridiculous. I was a chapel helper at the time, and her infraction was on the vacuum cords. We had to vacuum the chapel, and she ended up pulling the cord. You had to go up to the cord and grab it and unplug it, and she pulled the cord from across the room. And one of the staff members saw it and said, right now, give her 1,000 lines. And I just remember sitting there being like, I don't want to give this girl 1,000 lines. And I tried, she's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say. You either write the demerit right now or you will get one. So I had to give the demerit to her.
Tap someone to the floor?
I never had to tackle somebody to the floor, luckily, because I never got to the dorm helper status, because there was shower helper, kitchen helper, yard helper, and those were still below dorm helper. Dorm helper was the highest, so I was still below. So for the most part, they would call all of the dorm helpers to do that. And I'm thankful I was never made a dorm helper, because I was tall. I'm 5'9", and back then, I lost the weight, but I was still taller than most of the girls. And some of the girls at Victory, I remember one of the girls being, I want to say 10 years old. There were young girls in that program. I don't think a lot of people they think teenagers, like 16, 17. There was a 10-year-old girl that had gotten brought in, and they would sit, 16, 17-year-olds would sit on top of a 10-year-old girl and floor her. So I never had to do it, just because I was higher up on, in my own position, and they knew, because I had been vomiting and stuff like that. There was history where they thought that I was not ready for dorm helper, because they still thought I was a faker. Now, they never apologized at all for me throwing up, and they never apologized for thinking I was a faker. So,
do you have that playing in your mind today as an adult, that it's more like projecting it on other people, thinking, oh my God, she thinks I'm a faker, he thinks I'm a faker. Do you ever have that going on in your head?
Absolutely. I struggle with it at work, at my job. So, for instance, before the whole coronavirus thing happened, I ended up getting sick. And I never missed a day of work, and I had worked there for over a year. And I came into work, and I wasn't feeling good. And I remember showing up to work, being sick, and said, I just want you to see me so you could see that I'm sick, and I'm going to go home. And she said, honey, you could have called me. I would have believed you. And I said, I thought you would think I was faking it. And so what Victory did to me, I took that along with me in my life.
Sure.
And there was another incident where I had to go to the bathroom at work, and there's a movie where, I think it's like Shawshank Redemption, where the guy, he gets out of prison, and he's working in a supermarket, and he asks him, can he go to the bathroom? And the guy's like, don't ask me to go to the bathroom, just go to the bathroom. And so when I was at work, I would tell them, I'm like, I'm just going to the bathroom, just so you know. They're like, Mackenzie, just go to the bathroom.
Oh.
You don't have to tell us. But I'm so used to it.
You're conditioned a certain way, and then when you try to fit into society, it's very hard to get back in after being in these camps. And I call them camps. You piece it together. What else could we call this place? It's a camp here in America. By the way, this is the USA. USA, and this is happening still today.
Yeah.
The Circle of Hope Girls Ranch is still open. It's a sister program of this. We'll talk about, that's just one school of many. We'll talk about that later. Let's go back to your 100-pound loss. So here you lost 100 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And when your parents came to visit you, did they notice that you?
Oh yeah, they noticed, and they thought it was the best change that had ever happened to me. So when they came on my 3-month notice, I had lost that significant amount of weight, and I remember telling them, I want to go home, Mom. I want to go home. Take me home. I told her, I was like, they're doing things to me, and I don't think I told her that they were making me eat vomit, because you had to be very careful.
You said, Mom, they are doing things to me. You didn't say what. You were very general, and they still didn't take you out. So Mackenzie, can you tell me a little bit about how the staff would prep parents beforehand about what to expect from children that say there's, the staff aren't treating me right, I want out, it's horrible here? What do they say? What goes on?
They would say that they're backsliders and they haven't got right with God, and that they are the solution to their problems. And if they go home, that basically what's going to happen is they're going to get 7 times worse than what they were before coming into the program. And so they said, we're a solution for you. We're here to help you. We're going to fix this problem. Your daughter's not following, and you can tell she's not following because she's harassing you about going home. She hasn't gotten right with God. So we're going to fix her.
I have another question for you. Did your parents think it was a little odd that you weren't responding to any of the letters that they were sending to you? Because they blocked all of those letters. And as a parent, I would have said, did you know about this or that? And how come you didn't respond to that?
Yeah, the letters were so generic to me from my parents. And that's why a lot of times I was upset with them, because when I would get the letters, they would tell me about stupid things like how the cats are doing, or how the dog is doing, how your sister is, and
nothing about a problem, nothing about what you all need to work on as a family.
Right. Yeah.
That's why you did get letters, but for a long time they held back letters from your parents.
Yeah, and my parents didn't question the fact that I wasn't responding to them in that manner. I don't even think they would have noticed, because when I did write letters at home, you had to write full-page letters, and I really didn't know what to say, so a lot of times I would just quote scripture and write scripture in my letters.
Sounds familiar, Mackenzie. Sounds familiar. I mean, what else could you write? You couldn't write about, how's my boyfriend? Can you give him this note? Can you give my friend this note? I couldn't do anything like that, and neither could you. And that's
life was we lived very parallel lives. I had just started reading your book called Pieces of Victory, and I just want to say it's spot on to what happened.
Thank you. And when I heard your testimony on the Hammer podcast, everything you were saying, everything, I can completely identify with. It was spot on. It was really what went on in Ramona, California. So this preacher had Victory Christian Academy in Ramona, California. It got shut down in 1991 for not being fire code compliant and not having a license. He moves it to Florida, and he also moved it to Mexico. And Mexico is called Genesis by the Sea, and the Mexican authorities actually shut it down because they found a holding cell. Which is equivalent to the Get Right room here in America. It's here in America, but yet they kept that for 24 more years. 24 years until Alexander Zayas from the Tampa Bay Times got a hold of it. The story exposed it, and parents started pulling their kids out. It wasn't because the government came in. It was because the parents took the kids out. Yes. But the government needs to step in. The government needs to step in. And that's why we're trying to pass a federal bill. Jeneen Miller introduced it in 2010. Adam Schiff reintroduced it, and it's called Stop Child Abuse in Residential Programs Teens Act. Right now, it's dead in the water. we don't have anything reintroduced, we need to get a hold of Adam Schiff. So I encourage you to write letters to Adam Schiff and your congressman. So please do that. You can also send this video to your congressman. That would be wonderful.
Yes, because we didn't have anybody, come in there and investigate the place in Florida. I don't remember anybody ever being allowed in. And people will ask, they'll say, well, I went, for the parents, if any parents are watching this, they will say, well, I was a parent of a girl and I came in there and I was escorted around there and it looked up to par to me and everything looked nice. You would not notice a girl in the Get Right room because they would take the girls out of the Get Right room and they would put them in their dorm at the time. We were informed. Every single time a parent would show up to Victory, we were informed that they were coming. We knew what time they were coming. We knew that we had to act right. We had to smile. We could not go up to them and say, hey, something's going on in this place. You couldn't do that. So
what if you did? What if a kid finally got brave enough to say, hey, we're being abused in here. Can you help us? Can you help me? What would happen to that girl?
You would get either sent to the Get Right room, you would get lines, but I knew girls that got their time started over. And that is the most scariest thing that can happen to a girl, because you could be almost 12 months into the program and all they have to do is, and we didn't know that Palmer had to confer with the parents. We just thought he could do it like that. And the way that the staff was so good at convincing parents that they had the best interest at mind was scary. So they could convince really easily that your daughter's not ready to go home. She is acting up. And the parent couldn't investigate and come out to see, hey, is she acting up? The girl couldn't write home and say, I'm not acting up. So your time would be started over and you would go back, and they would start your time over. So your whole year would be started over.
And that's a lot of fun for them. The longer they keep you, the more money they get. Let's talk about the money. How much does it cost to send your child to Victory Christian Academy?
I'm not exactly sure though, because my parents, sorry, Jeneen, my parents, I think it was definitely over, I want to say it was over $1,000 a month.
Wow. And it's a sliding scale. It's a sliding scale. So it's whatever the parent can afford. I've also heard, depending on what other parents make, $5,000 for the month. And that was back in the 80s. That was back in the 80s. This is $1 billion industry, and you connect the thought. You can abuse your child in the privacy of your own home here in the United States, but by golly, if there's money behind it, no one wants to reinforce anything. No one cares. We have schools running rampant here in the United States, and they're untouchable. They're untouchable.
I think if you could get a girl, I'm not exactly sure, but I think my parents ended up getting a discount on the second time around. So if you're a B-back, the price of Victory went down. You weren't paying that astronomical amount for the program because they would try to get girls to come back to Victory. There were girls that I knew that came back 6 or 7 times to Victory and did another whole year there.
Wow. Terrible. And some girls are so brainwashed to think it was the best thing that happened to them that they end up staying longer voluntarily after 18.
Yep.
And they become staff. They become part of the staff.
Yes. And the cycle continues.
Right. It's scary because they truly believe it's the best thing that happened to them. And what happens when you think that something like this, when you think that abuse is the best thing that happened to you, what are you going to do to your children? You're going to pass it on down.
Yeah. And that's what ended up happening. Even with the younger staff members. Sometimes the youngest staff members were, just as mean as I was. Because there was one that came in and she was a girl and she didn't stay on as staff for a while, but she visited Victory for a couple months, and would actually let former girls come into Victory and stay on the property as long as they were on the up and up, and as long as they boasted that Victory was the best thing that ever happened to me. So as a contact from the outside world, we're seeing these girls come back into Victory, and they can't let it go as far as it was abuse. They're coming back into Victory, and they're visiting Victory, and they're going back in and saying, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. And you're thinking, this is a girl that was here years ago. Why would she want to be back at this place? And it's the brainwashing.
You had an idea of what Christianity was like before you went into this place, because you were able to distinguish the difference between a God that's a monster and a God that's loving. So, and even with that, you still had problems adapting. You still had problems. You still have problems with association.
Yes.
What happens when you go into a church, or you hear preaching, or you hear hymnals? What happens now?
I went into, I want to say it was Easter service. I went to an Easter service last year, and they played a song that triggered me, and I ended up walking out. Now, a lot of times the church that I'm in, the Methodist church, they'll play contemporary music, so it doesn't bother me that much. And they're very loving. They care about me. They're just so kind, completely different from Christians at Victory. And there was a hymnal that played, and it was Victory in Jesus.
Oh no, I know what you're talking about.
When that song played,
that would hit me.
Yeah, because they weren't emphasizing Victory in Jesus like the song Victory in Jesus. They were emphasizing the school, Victory in Jesus.
Right, exactly.
So they were associating the school into that hymn song.
Right.
And that song is still very hard for me to listen to. I can't. I've almost completely stopped listening to it.
I wouldn't be able to hear it either.
Because I can hear them singing it in my head still. As if it plays, I can physically see holding the Bible with his glasses, and the girls singing as loud as they can, and it's a flashback that I don't want,
And I could see that happening. That would happen to me too. I would be right back at Victory.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the aftermath, and just like Shawshank Redemption, how Morgan Freeman had asked, permission to use the bathroom. Your mindset is just different than the rest of the world, and you don't feel like you fit into society, and you feel inadequate. And can you describe it? Have you ever walked out of a job before because you felt these things?
Oh yeah, I've recently. I had been working 2 jobs, so there's one that I've been working at for over 2 years, and there's another one that I had recently started, and some of the staff and the girls, not the staff, see, I'm associating again with it,
right.
But the girls who worked there, they were talking about stuff, and it started getting negative, and they were talking about each other, and I almost felt like deceitful for being a part of it. So it was like I was projecting what the girls were at Victory on this group of women in my job, and it's really weird. It's hard to explain it to somebody who doesn't understand it, but
right.
I think he talks about in the movie. He says these walls are funny. You get to the point where you want to be out of there, but eventually you depend on them. And that's really how it is. I mean, you associate things that you never thought you would associate with Victory. And so I'm constantly back there. I had nightmares into my 30s. These were reoccurring dreams where I was back inside Victory. I was there. All the girls were there. And I was trying to run, and I couldn't run. And in some of those dreams, I'm even climbing over a fence, like California, even though there was no fence in Florida. I'm they're very vivid dreams.
Right.
And those lasted a long time.
There really was. There was an invisible fence. There was an invisible fence at the one in Florida.
There's always going to be a fence with that trauma.
Let's talk about Stockholm Syndrome for a minute. I think this has a lot to do with, survivors that come out of this place and think that this is the best thing that ever happened to them.
Yeah.
They literally sticking up for someone who held them captive, and they didn't have the First Amendment. They had no rights. They abused them. Abuse was happening all the time in this place, and yet they hold their abuser in the highest regard.
It's because by the end of it, they're so brainwashed that they want to defend the staff members. And I think a lot of girls go along with it when they get out, because if they're still under 18 and they're under their parents' care, they have to maintain this brainwashing, this act, because what's going to happen? You have a girl who completely does a 180 in Victory, and yes, those girls do a complete 180 because they are brainwashed.
Right.
And when they do that complete 180, what happens when it starts going away and they start resuming back to normal? Then the parents are like, "You're misbehaving again. You're not reading your Bible.
Right.
You're going to go back." Right. It's a vicious cycle. They have to remain in this until almost 18. I know for the longest time, I kept asking my parents, even though I was out of Victory for the second time, I was 18 years old, and I knew that, legally, they couldn't put me back there. I remember being 18, 19 years old, being like, "You swear you're not going to put me in Victory?" Before I would go to bed every night, because I was afraid they were going to do the light switch thing and wake me up.
Oh, no, that's awful. That's awful. And so did they pay these people to transport?
They were family members.
Isn't it?
Yeah. They were family members, and they got paid for it. But
they got paid for it, and they have the flight paid for. There were three people, right? 2 in the front, 1 in the back.
Yes. There were 3 people with me. It was all paid for, and if I can remember correctly, my mom actually has the receipt, that flight receipt that I took with all 3 of them, and it has their names on it and stuff like that. So, she's starting to dig some of the stuff back up, because she kept all my paperwork from Victory. And corporal punishment was glossed over. That was something people were like, well, how could they do that? Their parents sign something when they come to Victory, but it's glossed over. It's a vague term. Bar in the mouth, bar of soap in the mouth is not discussed in that paper, because I've seen it.
Let me clarify this for the audience. Parents sign their legal rights to this place. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. They sign away their legal rights.
And in that document, it is a generalization of corporal punishment, but corporal punishment is corporal punishment.
Right.
It
could be anything.
Anything.
It could be putting your nose in a corner, but that's not what happened to us. Right. We didn't get just your nose in the corner. There were other things, so it was glossed over. It
was a torture camp.
Yeah.
And I really don't believe that parents knew that this was going on. They just wanted a change in their child.
Yeah.
They wanted
to change through brainwashing. Now, how long that child acted that way, that depended on how long they were programmed in there to act that way.
I want to say this to the audience. If you are even contemplating as a parent to send your child to a boot camp for kids, wilderness camp conversion therapy, teen program rehabilitation, reform school, this will happen to you.
Yes.
Likely your kid will not want a relationship with you. It ruins family relationships.
Yep.
You won't have your kid again. And then when your kid comes out, if you thought they were rebellious before, now they're going to be 100 times angry because they were suppressing everything for a year, 2 years, or the duration when you locked them up, what do you think is going to happen? There's going to be an explosion, okay?
Yes.
So if you want to keep your relationship with your kid, I suggest you all work it out as a family, and it's because it's a whole family dynamic.
Yeah, that's another thing too, is we were taught, there were no counselors at Victory, so I couldn't go up to a counselor at Victory, because there were none of them there, and tell them, my sister, this is the problems that she's been having, my mom, this is what she does, or my dad, this is what he does. What do you think I should do in that situation? It's all your fault, you're the one with the problem. And so a lot of times, families, there's other issues that are going on. It's not just the daughter, it's not just the son that's sent away or the daughter. There's a family dynamic at play, and unless you're willing to do the work and really investigate what is going on with your child, but what is going on with you as well, you're not going to be able to figure out what's going on. You're just not.
When you put your kids in these programs, what you're doing is putting everything on hold, because they're taught to stuff their feelings down a dark path, and they cannot be who they want to be. There's identity. You have a big problem afterwards. Okay,
Right.
You're going to be angry again, loss of relationship. You think things are bad now? Just wait. You stick your child in one of these places, and by the way, there are many deaths that happen in these programs, including the one that we mentioned with Carrie Dunn. That's just one that we touched base on.
You didn't even know if these girls had asthma or if they had something else going on as far as, a medical disorder. So when they do take these girls down and they do get on top of them, you don't want to send your daughter there, because it's like, there's no chance. I think a lot of parents were lucky. I'll just say that their daughter came home from Victory.
July 17th, Eric Garner is about to be arrested in Staten Island, New York for illegally selling loose cigarettes. But something goes horribly wrong, and it's all caught on tape by a bystander.
I'm minding my business, officer. I'm minding my business. Please just leave me alone.
That's Garner, a black 43-year-old father of 6 weighing 350 pounds. Several New York City police officers are about to take him down.
Don't touch me, please. Not touch me.
Look closely. One officer, Daniel Pantaleo, who is white, has his arm around Garner's neck.
Put your hand behind you.
Listen to Garner's cries, muffled by the pavement.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
What police may not have known was that Garner suffered from asthma. His body appears to go limp. Garner was later declared dead at a nearby hospital. Police say he had a heart attack and died on the way. Less than a month after his death, the New York City medical examiner made the official ruling. The cause of death, compression of neck, a chokehold, plus compression of chest and prone positioning during physical restraint by police. His death was ruled a homicide. Complicating matters, the ME also found that asthma, obesity, and cardiovascular disease were contributing factors.
But I did know a student that was taken out of there because they were playing a game of Red Rover Come Over, and the female staff was outside, and they thought it would be fun to have these girls grab a tire, if I remember correctly, an old tire off of a car, and they would have to tug it away from the other girl. So you have all this frustration from being in the place. So the girls loved the game. We were all at it because we're going to get to rip this tire away from this other girl and get out some of our frustration. This was the only time this game was played. And one of the girls had ripped the tire so hard that she knocked one of the girls down on the floor. If I can remember correctly, I believe she had a concussion. Her eyes rolled to the back of her head. I was there when it happened. The fact that girl is not dead it's, you know, it's just shocking to me because I was there when it happened, and they took her to the hospital, and she did not come back to Victory for months because I believe she was in a coma at the time.
Wow. But other than that, there's a lot of medical neglect, obviously.
Yeah.
They took you off medication and didn't even take you to the hospital.
They didn't take me to the hospital, yeah. I had a psychiatrist tell me that I was lucky to be alive because of how quickly I was taken off of the medication and how much I had lost weight. I showed him a before and after picture of what I looked like before I entered Victory and after, and he told me I was lucky to be alive. Towards the end of it, there was another girl who came in who had the same issue as me, and they took her off her medication, and she started throwing up too. And they were starting to do the same thing to her that they were doing to me. So, you know, it was on another student.
Oh my God. Because I was just going to ask you too, did you witness other girls having to get force fed to eat their own vomit?
Yeah, there were other girls. And there were girls that got, like, they couldn't have their hair, like, show you an example. You couldn't have your hair, like, close, like how it's close right now. Couldn't have that. They would come out and take a pair of scissors and cut your hair.
Oh,
They would cut it so close to your scalp that it would be bald. I remember a girl coming out of the office. They had cut her hair so close there was a bald patch there.
Oh my God.
They kept telling her to get her hair out of her face, but just the way that her hairline was, it just fell in her face. It wasn't her fault. It just the way her hair was. It did that, and they cut her hair. And they had to hold her down to chop her hair off, and they weren't regular, you know, hair cuttery scissors, and it wasn't done by somebody who's a stylist or, you know, works with cutting hair. They took a pair of paper cutting scissors to cut her hair off, and they cut it so close to the scalp. Yeah.
So it looks like you had to wear your hair in a ponytail all day long.
Yeah, there's a lot of pictures of me at Victory where my hair is just pulled back because I didn't want to have them associate with my hair being in my face.
It just been one more thing that you had to worry about. You know, these people are crazy. When you first got into Victory, this is pretty important. Mm-hmm. Did you think, what the hell is going on, and why are all these girls agreeing with it, and other staff, and you're thinking, where the hell am I? Is this the Twilight Zone? Is this the Stepford Wives? Are these Stepford Christian children? What is going on here? Did you think that? Like, what world did I come into?
Yeah, I remember trying to relate to one of the helpers when I was throwing up and when I first came in and when I was trying to I was like, hey, you know, like, and she's like, yes, you say yes, you know, can I help you? Like, yes. And I'm like, so, and she was just such a robot at that point. Right. You couldn't even relate to another girl.
Right.
So
it wasn't normal. It wasn't normal at all. And these places are not normal. It's like the Twilight Zone, really. Another world where other girls your age, they are not able to identify with them at all on a same level.
You know, and they would get on kicks with each other where they would do devotions and they would go around the room, and then, you know, so-and-so would reverse, and then so-and-so would pick up on a verse, and so-and-so would pick on a verse. So you have a group of 25 girls in the dorm. It was that 24/7. And you couldn't escape it. You didn't have time to think about anything else unless you were going to sleep and dreaming. And we even got reprimanded for what they thought we were doing as we were going to sleep. I remember them telling us, like, if you're planning on dreaming of your boyfriends, like, don't even plan on it, because we'll find you out eventually, because eventually you're going to mention them, and you're going to get a demerit. So they would even haunt your, like, sleep in there.
Wow, that's awful. I remember to the point where you just couldn't even think about, and couldn't even think about your boyfriend in your head at all.
No, you were nervous to even think about something like that, because then there was the chance that you would mess up and talk about it. And so you didn't mention it. You didn't think about it. Tried not to. I was really into music before I went into Victory. Like, I played piano, I played guitar and stuff. And so music was my therapy for my anxiety. It got me, through a lot. And to be told that I couldn't sing or, do anything until a certain amount of time in there had passed, that was really hard. And then we could play guitar, play piano, but they could only be, you had to be past your 3 months, you had to be off buddy, you had to have a staff member approve you playing whatever was played, and it had
so
to be
sad.
Yeah. So you couldn't decompress and just play the piano and play whatever.
Right. It's a perfect outlet for you to do something like that. Mackenzie, can you tell me a little bit about the visit with your parents?
Yeah, for my first visit, I remember being so brainwashed. There's a video of me where I'm just quoting scripture and singing songs, Christian songs. And so, this was the first time that I had seen my parents in 90 days. And there's nothing wrong with quoting scripture or doing any of that, but I really should have been connecting with them. I hadn't seen them in 3 months.
And working on a relationship instead of just quoting scripture, because that's all you could talk about. You couldn't really talk about family issues. It wasn't even about family issues and then maybe incorporating scripture. Oh, no. It was just strictly God and the Bible, and that was it. And that's a red flag, by the way, parents. If your kid just spits out nothing but scripture and just talks about God and doesn't talk about anything else, that's a problem.
Yeah. I just remember I could have used that time to spend time with my parents, and I want to make clear too, the video recordings in this place were taken by my parents on a visit. They brought the camera in. We weren't allowed to have one. And the staff was on good behavior when they knew they were being recorded. And all of those videos that that you're showing, they knew that they were being recorded. Oops, sorry.
And they were on their best behavior, period, when parents were anywhere around or when they came for visits for the service. So the service was different. Church sermons were different than what they were with us. We were on a witch trial.
Yes. And when the parents would come in, the sermons, we could almost breathe a sigh of relief, because we knew that the sermons were going to be a lot easier and just a generic sermon, because the parents were there.
Thank you for being brave enough to tell your story and to get these places closed down. Right now we have the Circle of Hope Girls Ranch located in Missouri. It is a sister program to the Roll-Off Schools, which is a sister program to Victory Christian Academy, New Bethany, the Hephzibah House. They are open today, and they are abusing girls as we speak. We need to get this place shut down. We need to rescue Rachel Kelso. Hashtag Rachel, where is Rachel Kelso? Hashtag, where is Rachel Kelso? Thank you so much for being a part of the show, and looking forward to doing many things to make changes in our society in the U.S. to help close down these schools, because it's an epidemic that's happening in our country.
Yes, it is. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for being on the show. It was such an honor to have you here, and I appreciate you being brave and telling your story. We need more survivors to come forth and tell their stories so we can provide oversight in this country. There needs to be changes. Please, I urge you to get a hold of your congressman, or get a hold of Adam Schiff and have him reintroduce to Stop Child Abuse in Residential Programs Teen Act. This is a federal bill. This is an epidemic that's happening across our country. I want this to stop. If you are a parent and you are contemplating sending your child to a lockdown reform school, wilderness camp, boot camp for kids, rehabilitation program, conversion therapy, if you have a 1% chance that this could happen to your child, why would you even take that risk? My name is Jeneen Miller, and this is Pieces of Victory.
TV land. Yes, especially Nancy, and yes, you're my friend, and yes, I love you all, and what else? I love Aunt Marcia, and I send her my best wishes, and Aunt Denise, and everyone else. And Jeffrey, keep on playing the drums, and Grandma Crandall, and Papa C, I love you too, and everyone else, and just have a great Easter. Bye. I love you too.